Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vicini. We're powered by CLNS Radio. Today on the show, we're going to do a little bit of recruiting today on the show. We're going to talk to Scott Phillips from over at NBC Sports and Bleacher Report. Scott does a great job, lives in Chicago, which I will be for the NBA Draft Combine next week. I'm looking forward to seeing him. How's it going, buddy?
It's great to be on, Sam. Thanks for having me on. And yeah, it should be a lot of fun and catching up in Chicago next week, Draft Combine, and a busy time of year with a lot of AAU stuff with the recent live period weekends coming around.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the live period being out here in LA. I think it's like at the end of this month. It's going to be really fun because I haven't seen a lot of these underaged, well now senior class of 2018 kids since last summer, really. So I'm looking forward to seeing them. I'm looking forward to see the growth in their games. But the main reason that I'm having you on is to kind of talk about that and to kind of talk about the way that some of these kids are getting better. But before we do that, I want to talk about Duke just got a commitment from Jordan Goldwire. If you have not heard that name, I would be surprised if Scott has heard that name. Have you seen Jordan Goldwire play, Scott?
I've heard of him. He plays for Norcross, which is a talented program in Georgia that regularly produces Division I players, including, I believe, Lance Thomas this year is headed to Louisville. But no, I have not really seen him play, as you kind of alluded to. This one came out of nowhere.
Yeah, so his only other offers were Eastern Kentucky and Mercer. He had taken official visits to both. He says the funniest thing is Jeff Goodman got him somehow. I don't know how anyone has his phone number, but Jeff has it. He goes, "This is crazy," Goldwire told ESPN moments after committing while on a visit to Duke on Monday. "Something I never expected. I was going to commit to Eastern Kentucky, but Duke showed interest recently, and it was something I couldn't pass up." So, he is in genuine disbelief that he is going to be going to Duke University next year. That is what this is, and it is the weirdest, commitment that I can remember, I feel like.
Yeah, it's strange. Duke has taken some guys over the past few years, some filler guys like Jack White from Australia who maybe weren't being recruited at such a high level. I think Jack White was being recruited heavily by Boise State at the time as his kind of highest level of interest, and the Blue Devils took him. So they've taken a kind of a flyer on a guy the last couple years, but they obviously need help at the point guard spot, and that's the reason they made this commitment happen from Goldwire here.
Yeah, and that's kind of the interesting factor here, right? So they have a couple of balls up in the air right now at point guard, or at least in what could be a point guard, because I don't really think Frank Jackson is a true point guard. He's more of a combo, but he's someone that you could theoretically see there at some point in the next couple of years. So Frank Jackson is declared for the NBA draft right now. Trevon Duval is still just kind of up in the air in terms of where he's going to go to college. You hear rumors about eligibility with Duval. I don't really want to get into that because I don't know how true they are, how not true they are. But with Jordan Goldwire committing to Duke this season, what do you think that says about how Duke feels about Frank Jackson and how they feel about Trevon Duval? And do you think that it has any impact in terms of whether or not those guys, whether or not Duke thinks those guys are going to be playing for the Blue Devils next season?
I'd say Duke at the very least is skittish at this moment in time, because to take a guy, again, who's taken official visits to schools like Mercer and Eastern Kentucky, no disrespect to those programs, but that's usually not even close to the caliber of athlete that Duke has recruited these last couple years with the amount of one-and-done five-star talents that they've brought in. But, to answer your question, Sam, I think that now with Frank Jackson declaring for the draft, with Trevon Duval taking so long to make his decision, and some rumors floating around about him maybe potentially going to other schools or maybe testing the waters to potentially go pro, that they're obviously seeking out other options. They looked at Mark Smith before he committed to Illinois last week and tried to evaluate him and get in late. So we've seen Duke try to get in with a number of point guards here late. They obviously want some more ball handling options. They've got plenty of other talented guys around them to still be a certainly capable team in the ACC, but they definitely need somebody like Jackson or Duval to come in to stabilize that point guard position.
So I guess on some level, even if Trevon Duval and Kevin Knox were to commit to Duke, they would still have had one open scholarship, and that's before Frank Jackson makes his decision. Frank Jackson is still on scholarship at Duke, and they would have still had this open spot to give out to someone. On some level, I get it, but it's just weird to me because, I don't really... I'm shocked that they're taking a kid that like everyone in the recruiting world, like even like recruiting experts such as yourself, were like, wow, like who is this kid? Essentially like asking like, have I seen this kid play before? Do I remember him playing before? Like it's just a funky thing to me that like I said, like I can't remember a situation like this. And they already took a flyer like kind of like this. Like Alex O'Connell's bigger and he's definitely a more well-rated and well-seen prospect, but he kind of struck me as their like flyer this year. Didn't he to you?
A little bit. I mean, he's still a top 100 caliber guy who's a late bloomer and played well in July. But yeah, it is interesting, Sam. You point out how he didn't really have fanfare, and to kind of make a comparison, I guess you'd have to look at a team like Kentucky taking a guy like Dominique Hawkins 4 years ago, a guy who wasn't getting any other high major scholarship offers. He was an in-state kid. They had a lot of scholarships to give with the constant turnover of John Calipari recruiting one-and-done guys, and he turned out to be a serviceable, solid 4-year guard who was obviously adjusted to his role, knew what was asked of him, and didn't try to play over the guys that were recruited above him every single year. And I'm thinking that Duke is kind of viewing Goldwire in the same sense. He had that quote at the end of the Goodman story about coming in and having an opportunity to run the second team. And I think that if they find a guy who's willing to be a role player, he wants to be a secondary ball handler and kind of help and stabilize things, then I think you have to take a flyer on a guy like him late with scholarships open.
Yeah. I mean, who knows? This guy, with all of us saying all of this, he's probably going to turn into like Duke's version of Frank Mason, isn't he?
Sure, yeah, exactly. I mean, again, good example. Frank Mason really wasn't heralded that highly as a recruit. Kansas took him, and he became National Player of the Year in a couple of years. So these programs are, capable of developing guys. We're used to them recruiting one-and-done NBA caliber talents, but it is fascinating to see a guy like Goldwire get this opportunity.
Yeah. Let's move on to like kind of where Duke is in the general sphere of recruiting now. They're obviously waiting on Trevon Duval. They're waiting on Kevin Knox as well. What are your impressions on, do you think that Duke is going to like kind of close it down with both of those guys?
I don't think with both of them. I think that they have a solid chance to get one of them. I think that with Kevin Knox, there's a sense that, schools like North Carolina could still be involved with Duval. It seems like Baylor is heavily involved. And again, these guys are going to wait on some NBA draft decisions. They're going to kind of see where things stand in a couple weeks here. And I think Duke, again, taking a guy like Goldwire this late, looking at other options like Mark Smith, shows that they're definitely skittish about losing both of these guys to other schools. These are heavily contested recruitments for both Knox and Duval. These are quality players that Duke really could use both of. They don't really have that jumbo wing that they've had in the past with guys like Jason Tatum and Jabari Parker and Justice Winslow, and they certainly don't have a point guard, as we just talked about, so they could really use both of these guys. These aren't just players that would be adding to the wealth of an already talented roster. These are pieces that they really are going to need if they want to make a run at a national championship next year.
Yeah, like to me, Kevin Knox is like the perfect player for Duke almost. He's a 6'8", like face-up 4 who can really slash, and he's developed his jump shot over the course of his years in high school. Like he's kind of everything that we've come to know from Duke with like Justice Winslow and Jabari Parker and Brandon Ingram down to Jason Tatum this year. He'd just be kind of like the next guy in line of their stretch fours. And without him, I feel like they're going to be forced to play bigger more. They're going to be forced to almost play Wendell Carter at the 4 next year, I feel like, without him.
Yeah, absolutely, Sam. And I wrote about this a little bit for the Duke 24/7 sports site, but Duke's kind of at a crossroads here with what they're going to do with the 4 next year. If Knox does come, then they do have that lineage that we just talked about, guys like Parker and Tatum and Ingram. But, if they have to go with 2 bigs, they're certainly relying on Marquise Bolden to be much better than he was this past year as a freshman. And they're also relying on Wendell Carter to potentially stretch the floor a little bit more than he's shown as a big man at the high school level. Now, obviously, he's shown a bit more of a face-up game than some of these other Duke big men that have come in, but maybe not a consistent, reliable three-point threat that they would like to have at the 4 that we've seen from some of these past groups that Coach K has had.
Well, it'll be really interesting, too, with Carter if they don't end up getting Knox, because do they ask him to, like, kind of stretch it out a little bit more? Do they play him a little bit more on the perimeter? I know that he's, like, 6'11", he's 250 pounds, but his mechanics on his jump shot actually do look great. Like, he looks like he should be able to kind of easily stretch it out beyond the college three-point line, at least. So I'll be interested to see, like, if they don't end up with Kevin Knox, how they kind of use Wendell Carter next year, because he is, I think he's gone kind of underrated among all of these other elite players like Mohammed Bamba and even Trevon Duval. And then you look at guys like Michael Porter. Wendell Carter, I think he's going to come in and he's going to make an immediate impact at Duke.
I absolutely agree with you, Sam, and you kind of mentioned him flying under the radar a little bit, and I think that's because he doesn't really have like a freakish trait that these other guys have that you just mentioned. Mohammed Bamba is always associated with that wingspan and that standing reach that would be second among all NBA players. Trevon Duval is always mentioned in the same breath as guys like Derrick Rose, who certainly had phenomenal athleticism at the point guard position and changed the way that the game was played in a lot of ways. And, guys like Michael Porter are those jumbo type of wings that we've heard with the Kevin Durant and the Brandon Ingram type comparisons. But with Wendell Carter, he's a little bit undersized in some cases, depending on how you look at his measurements. Obviously a decent wingspan, but he's the type of guy who's more substance over style. He's getting it done with consistent double-doubles. He's had great performances against all of these quality big men in the class of 2017, so he's not going to be a guy to be taken lightly. And I think if he does show a face-up game, if he's able to stretch the floor out to three-point range, he's a guy who's certainly going to be in that conversation to be a top 5 pick in the next year's draft, because he's a guy who's going to face a lot of double teams as a post threat. He's going to be able to handle them. He's shown a capability to pass out of that and to score as well. And I'm fascinated to see how Duke uses him next season. He's a very talented player. Yeah,
absolutely. Let's kind of talk about some of the uncommitted kids here. Mohammed Bamba, where do you think he ends up?
That's a tough one. It's been all over the place. So a couple weeks ago, I thought kind of Texas and Michigan were in decent position. Now I think kind of Kentucky more and more looks like a factor for them. And, obviously Kentucky's got a ton of bigs in the equation, but Bamba's got the type of length and athleticism that we seldom see from a high school big man. He's got a chance to impact the game right away as a defender and rebounder. And his offense really isn't as bad as some people make it out to be. He's got a little bit of touch. He's got some moves he's developing, some decent footwork. And like I said, he runs the floor so well. If Kentucky gets in transition, he's capable of finishing lobs and other plays around the rim.
Yeah, he plays super hard, which I like. Like he's a guy who's always going to kind of rim run. He's always going to roll off of screens, and he's going to get out and transition in a way that is going to make him at least somewhat valuable offensively early on, just kind of doing dirty work, right? Like he's going to be a guy that's going to get a lot of garbage buckets, I feel like, either off of offensive rebounds or, off of, point guards just kind of throwing the ball up and seeing what he can do with it, or, lead ball handlers just throwing it up and doing what he can. I'm optimistic on him. I think he's probably going to average like 12 points a game next season and not be like crazy, but he's still going to be just like an absolute shutdown defender, and he's going to be just a really, really good NBA player, I think, as well.
Yeah, I think people are going to be pleasantly surprised by how good Mohammed Bamba is as a perimeter defender. He's the type of guy who can switch out onto wings or even some guards in some cases and stick with them because his length and his lateral quickness are elite for his size. There were instances last summer where at Peach Jam he would be asked to guard a guy like Brian Bowen, who's a McDonald's All-American wing, and he would shut down Brian Bowen in the last final minutes of a close game. And that's the type of advantage you have with a guy like Mohammed Bamba. If you get him on your team, you can do different things defensively, switching on the perimeter. You can hedge hard out to the timeline, do all sorts of different things defensively that other big men aren't capable of doing. And he's going to be fascinating to see in terms of what he's allowed to do defensively and how much he grows offensively.
Yeah, absolutely. Trevon Duval, where do you think he ends up at the end?
Boy, you know what? I've always thought that there is an off chance he goes pro, Sam, and I say that because there's some connections to the other guys that have gone pro in the past, the guys like Emmanuel Mudiay and Terrence Ferguson. They had the connection to the prime prep, advanced, international advanced preparatory, whatever you want to call it. All three of those guys played there. They're all three affiliated with Under Armour. Not to say that Under Armour has any influence, but they do a little bit. But I think it's an interesting case because he's waiting so long. There are some questions about him jumping school so often, finishing up at IMG Academy this year. But I do think that at the end of the day, Trevon Duval ends up at Baylor. I have no idea why. Call it a hunch. Don't call it anything other than just that feeling. But I think that he opts to stay back in Texas where he was his junior year. He seemed very comfortable and happy there. And Baylor's done a great job of recruiting him these last couple years.
The first time I saw Trevon Duval play, I thought I was watching like an NBA All-Star like in the future. He's just so explosive. He's so long. He's so creative too in a lot of ways. Like he needs to improve as a passer and decision maker for sure. But he has all of the explosiveness that you're looking for. He has the ability to handle the ball, and he's just there's something about him in terms of the way that he is just as creative as all get out that like I just really dig.
Yeah, he's got this magnetic presence about him, and when I say that, when I talk to a couple of the guys at McDonald's All-American game, I like to kind of get a sense of which other guys in practices are impressing them, or which other guys they like to play with. And a lot of them mention Trevon Duval. They love his ability to find them in certain transition spots. He's getting better and better at making reads, and I think that a lot of those wild passes and wild flashes that he had in the past were due to boredom. He was an elite level player, an elite athlete playing at the high school level, got tired of certain things, and I think he was kind of trying some things at times that maybe he wouldn't try in a normal setting against great competition. But I'm fascinated to see how he does at the college level. He's got that breakneck speed in transition. He can play well above the rim, and as you mentioned, his measurables in terms of his wingspan allows him to potentially be an elite perimeter defender. Yeah,
I'm a big fan of his. Kevin Knox, do you think he goes Duke? Do you think he goes Florida State, UNC? Where are you at on Kevin Knox?
I'm going to end up saying North Carolina on this one. Again, no inside information here whatsoever. I haven't really been chasing class of 2017 recruiting info as much as I should, but with Knox, I just think that he's a perfect replacement for a guy like Justin Jackson who goes pro, and North Carolina gives him an opportunity to potentially win a title next season while being a one-and-done guy. Maybe a better opportunity than Duke, because with Duke there's so many young guys and freshmen and uncertainty at the point guard position. Now with Joel Berry coming back with North Carolina, you have that stable. I think he's a nice fit there.
Yeah, I think that two of the other guys that are super interesting, Brian Bowen is still uncommitted, and he strikes me as more of a 2-year player than a one and done, which makes his commitment all the more fascinating because his, Michigan State, Miles Bridges decides to come back. Alonzo Trier decides to come back to Arizona. Does he really want to go to Creighton for what could be multiple years? Where do you think Brian Bowen ends up? Because he's a great scorer on the college level, I think. It's just, is he going to be able to – he's never going to be like an elite athlete, and those are the kind of guys that the NBA looks for.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head, Sam. He's a guy who is certainly justified as a McDonald's All-American this year. He helps La Lumiere to a national championship at the high school level, but he's not really that caliber of athlete that NBA teams are salivating over with certain other guys. But with Bowen, a lot of rumors this weekend about Creighton and DePaul. I know DePaul's going to surprise a lot of people, but they just made an assistant coaching hire of Shane Hireman, who was his head coach at La Lumiere. So obviously some traction there to be gained from the Blue Demons. They're moving into a new arena next year and have some intriguing transfers and guys like Max Strus and Austin Grandstaff coming in, along with some guys like Justin Roberts and Jalen Butts who could be Big East contributors. So Creighton's still the favorite here, I think. I think he ends up with the Blue Jays, but DePaul's certainly going to get a chance. Bowen's taken an unofficial visit there recently. As I mentioned, they hired Shane Hireman, and they're certainly going to get an opportunity to hear, to give their pitch to Brian Bowen.
I am 100% in on a McDonald's All-American going to DePaul.
Me too. That's my alma mater. I'm a DePaul graduate, and to see them kind of struggle the last 10 years has not been much fun.
Oh, my God. Let's go to M.J. Walker as the last one here. Where do you think M.J. ends up?
You know what? I think that Virginia Tech is getting a lot of late traction here. They had the official visit. Buzz Williams has certainly done a great job with tough and rugged physical guards and perimeter guys in the past with Jay Crowder and Jimmy Butler and, some of the guys that he's had at Virginia Tech these last few years. So I'm going to go with Virginia Tech. They're getting the late push off the official visit. I think that he would be a great fit with the Hokies and Buzz Williams.
And then we think Jeremiah Tillman's just going to Missouri, right?
I would assume
talk about that?
Yeah, I think that Illinois is going to get some late traction. Mark Smith, who just committed to the Illini, he's Mr. Basketball in his senior season in Illinois, is a friend of Jeremiah Tillman. They played in the same St. Louis metro area. That will certainly play a factor into things, as well as the fact that Illinois does need him to come in and play right away. But the chance to play with Michael Porter Jr., the chance to potentially play with Jontay Porter, could be too enticing to pass up for a guy like Jeremiah Tillman.
Yeah, and that'll lead right into the next part of this podcast, because I read your piece earlier today on NBC Sports, and one of your first points was that you think Jontay Porter should probably reclassify to 2017 instead of 2018. What makes you think that from what you've seen on the circuit so far this year?
He's just ready. You can tell he's a guy who I think has gone from being a second banana to his brother, not only with Mocan last year in the UIBL, but with Hale this year at the high school level. But, the way that he's come out this spring so far through 8 games and been a commanding presence, a go-to guy, a guy who can, hit three-pointers, he can protect the rim, he can, post double-doubles. I've been thoroughly impressed by what he's had to offer. And given his size, given the way that he's improved since even the beginning part of 2017, I think he'd be a really nice second or third option to his brother next season at Missouri. Obviously, the Tigers don't have a high level of talent returning, especially, guys in the front court positions. I think Porter, if he can space the floor, add a little bit of rim protection, become another rebounder, that's only going to help Michael Porter Jr. in Missouri next season. I think he's ready to play. Interesting,
because he's like a top 40 kid or so, right?
Yeah, when Rivals updated the rankings, they put him around the mid-20s, I want to say, for the latest class of 2018 rankings, and I think that's about right. So, if he were to reclassify to class of 2017, which is a better, deeper class by far than class of 2018, I think he'd be more in the 50 to 75 range, but that's certainly nothing to scoff at, and that's a guy that Missouri really could use to come in next year and play with Michael Porter.
Yeah, that's the kind of kid that Missouri has been missing on recently, right? It's not that. And obviously they've been missing on the elite kids as well, but they've even been struggling with Kim Anderson in charge, and now that Konzo's there, it's totally different, but they've been struggling to even get those top 75 kids, and I think that's the difference between them being what they should be, which is a perennial top half of the SEC team, versus what they've been recently, which is dumpster fire, I think is the clinical term for that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be a fascinating thing to watch that entire state of Missouri and that St. Louis metro area these next few years, because as you kind of mentioned, Sam, they haven't recruited that area well, but now with Konzo coming in and his recruiting pedigree, getting one-and-done caliber guys like Jaylen Brown and pros like Ivan Rabb, he's certainly landed some quality pieces. Travis Ford at St. Louis, now has Jordan Goodwin, a top 100 player from the St. Louis area, and Cartier Gordon in the class of 2018, and Illinois with Brad Underwood and Orlando Antigua as an assistant coach is not going to be somebody to take lightly either. So, those recruiting wars in that St. Louis metro area, Missouri as a whole, Southern Illinois, could be fascinating with those 3 coaches involved these next few years.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Let's move on to the top end of the 2018 recruiting class, who you have seen this spring, I believe, over the last 2 weekends, right?
Yeah, I was at the Adidas Gauntlet in Dallas, Fort Wayne area last weekend, and then Indianapolis hosted the Under Armour Association and Nike EYBL this past weekend, so I've been able to see all 3 shoe leagues.
Yeah, that's awesome, because it is becoming a bit more fractured, it seems like, in terms of what kids are going where.
Yeah, definitely. Last year I described the EYBL as the red wedding of AAU basketball. They basically cleaned up on every major class of 2017 prospect. They really left nothing for Under Armour and Adidas in those classes. This year it's a lot more balanced. Adidas has a lot of the top-end class of 2018 kids, but the class of 2019, which is the much stronger class, is kind of spread out among all 3 groups. And certainly Nike and Under Armour have their own class of 2018 stars in their leagues as well.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about one of the guys who plays for the Nike EYBL and plays in that league. Marvin Bagley, to me, even taking into account last year's class, the 2017 class that will be playing in college this upcoming year, I think he has been the best prospect in the high school ranks over the course of even last year when he was a junior. I felt like he was probably the best NBA prospect in the high school ranks. How would you feel about that?
I would certainly listen to that argument, Sam, because I think Marvin Bagley has established himself as an elite national prospect since he was getting high major scholarship offers as a middle schooler. He's lived up to the hype his entire time as a high school player, and certainly in the EYBL so far, he's been tremendous. He leads the league both in scoring and rebounding. He's blocked shots. His team is 0-8 so far. That's something to obviously watch for, but certainly no fault of Bagley's because he's been exceptional.
How is his team 0-8 is my question.
Well, the weird thing about this class, again, certain guys at the top, like Bagley, Zion Williamson, Romeo Langford, they all have kind of their own teams that were built around them in some cases this year. So they didn't really join powerhouses that were established in their area over the last few years. They're kind of playing for newer teams that, are built around them, so to speak. So maybe not the typical high major type of teammates that we normally see on these shoe company circuits. And again, I think that speaks more to the credit of these leagues and how these teams have been been built now that there's an established track record that these programs are expected to have quality players in place to compete in these leagues.
Yeah. The reason that I say that I think Bagley is probably the best prospect in high school basketball is that, yeah, he's 6'10", 220 pounds. He's a bit more physically developed. But when I look at him, I see a highly skilled player who can already shoot, like step back and shoot from the high school three-point line. He is, to me, the most fluid and like the most fluid true four. Like Michael Porter kind of floats between the 3 and 4, a little bit skinny, doesn't really have the body that Bagley does. He's just so fluid for his powerful size and powerful nature that when I look at that guy play, I don't know who's going to stop him.
Yeah, you kind of hit it on the head. I mean, he really is fluid. It's remarkable to see a guy who is around 6'11", 220 pounds as a high school kid run the floor the way that Marvin Bagley does. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing that stands out to me about Marvin Bagley is how quickly he gets off the floor on his first and second jumps. It's what's enabled him to become the EYBL's leading rebounder so far. There's so many plays this past weekend where he just won balls because he was getting tips over to himself. I mean, there'd be other guys on the floor who were equally as tall, if not taller, but he just won balls because he was able to continue to bat them around himself and able to eventually win them. I mean, he's got this remarkable timing about him, and with that exceptional ability to get off the floor, he just snatches nearly everything in sight, and he's starting to become better as an out-of-area rebounder. You mentioned that fluidity and how well he moves. He's getting rebounds all over the floor now. He's averaging close to 15 a game so far, so obviously he's doing a great job of just tracking down everything in his area and kind of owning the interior.
I don't know that I want to compare him to anyone, but I'm going to do it anyway because I'm an idiot. It's like Blake Griffin-ish almost. Does that kind of sound right to you? Just like the way that he leaps and the way that he has the body control while still maintaining the power, the fluidity, and like kind of the agility as well. It's striking almost to me.
Yeah, the first time you see him play, it really does kind of stand out, even for somebody who does see a lot of elite prospects, a lot of college and pro players. Like, it's just, you don't see a guy that young who's that big, who's that fluid, and it's been special to see guys like Ayton and Bagley come through these last couple years because there's been some kind of new age big guys who could be really changing the way the game is played, especially with how those guys are able to shoot the ball with touch. If Bagley or Ayton can kind of step out and develop even more, then we could be seeing even more and more new age bigs with legitimate size who could obviously play in the post as well.
Yeah. Let's go to the guy who's kind of considered number 2 in that class. And I don't know that you would have him at number 2 because I think I remember talking to you at the Final Four and you weren't necessarily in my boat on this, but I'm not sure what to think of Zion Williamson yet as like a next level prospect almost.
Yeah, you're not the only one, and obviously the mixtape hype is abound. People know him as a national sensation, and really a lot of that is justified. If you look at how big and explosive Zion Williamson is. He's a 6'6", 6'7", 230-ish pounds. When you see him leap off the floor at that size, I mean, he looks like a defensive end who's throwing down these ridiculously violent, fluid dunks. I mean, it is a sight to see, and he's been doing this sort of thing since last summer when he was the MVP of the NBA Top 100 camp, playing a year up. And you know, for a guy like him now to have this kind of elite level hype, it's concerning almost. In Dallas, people would show up about an hour before he was scheduled to play. You would notice it almost because the gym would heat up during that time. It was a small, cramped facility with 6 courts, and you know, obviously there's a lot of air flowing around, but when it becomes to a point where it's overcrowded, the building gets hotter and hotter, and Zion Williamson would take the floor, and people would have their phones out the whole time wanting to see the spectacle of these dunks that he was putting on, and he was playing a little bit hurt, so I think he disappointed some people, and you kind of hear some whispers on the way out that he doesn't live up to the hype, and I don't think that's necessarily fair in some cases, but there are some things to be concerned about. He shoots a really hard ball from the perimeter. He has yet to really have a clean stroke from either the three-point line or the free throw line, and he hasn't really established much of a scoring touch outside of 14 feet. He does have some capable ball handling moves where he's able to use his quickness or his size depending on the matchup guarding him on the perimeter. He's a ridiculous rebounder for his size. He's got a great secondary leap, as we just alluded to with a guy like Marvin Bagley, Bagley. But, again, the size is a little bit of a question mark, and I don't know what kind of perimeter skill he's going to bring to the table. He looks like a man-child right now at the high school level. What's it going to be like once he faces bigger, faster, more athletic guys at the college and NBA levels?
That's my big question. Like, I can't tell what he's going to be at the next levels. Is he going to? He's definitely a 4, I think. He's
I
listed,
think so as well.
He's listed as like a 3 everywhere, but if you can't really shoot, because again, like you said, I have never seen him really shoot the ball well. If you can't really shoot and you're a straight line driver, you're best off taking advantages of 4s. But as the game downsizes, we're going to continue to see, the matchup advantages that, quote unquote 3s that play down lineups and play 4s. Those advantages are going to kind of disappear, right? So I question what he is in terms of like being this hyper elite prospect that people are so excited about because they see the hyper athleticism and the dunking ability. But, sometimes those guys just like kind of figure it out, right? Like Larry Johnson's a great example of someone who was that big, that powerful, that strong from an early age and just figured it out, right? So, I don't want to I'm not throwing anyone that's 16 years old under the bus for sure, because he is just an incredible talent because of his incredible athleticism, but there are concerns that it might be a little too much too quick, I guess, for me.
Yeah, definitely. And I think some of the things that you look at where a guy like Seventh Woods drew an immense amount of YouTube hype as an early product out of South Carolina, and this past season barely came off the bench for the national champion North Carolina Tar Heels. Now, I'm not saying that Seventh Woods and Zion Williamson are even in the same league as terms of prospects, but what I'm saying is you have to look at the competition that they're facing and who they're playing against and how long that footage was compiled in terms of making those mixtapes. And when you see Zion Williamson play against elite competition like you'll see him face this summer, that's when I want to see him kind of, thrive and really come out and show that he's an elite prospect, because now that he's a marked man, teams are going to be looking at him every single time that he's on the schedule. They're going to throw double teams at him. They're going to scout his games more than you'd see a typical grassroots team scout them. And you're going to have guys that are hungry to prove themselves playing against the guy who's getting millions of views on YouTube. So, it's easy to become that, but now Zion Williamson has to maintain if he wants to be that elite level prospect that he's been pegged to be.
Let's go to Romeo Langford, who I think it's kind of like those 3 are the top 3, it seems like, for everyone in that class right now, right? Would you agree with that?
I wouldn't. I would personally have those guys probably in the 4-5 range. We can go into that, but in terms of Romeo Langford, I do like him quite a bit. I think that he's got some great scoring abilities, some great things about his length and athleticism at guard, but his consistency really throws me off. He's the type of guy who could go for 30 or 40 points in one game. Then the next game, playing against mediocre competition, he doesn't elevate his level of play, and he might score 10 to 15. And his shooting numbers haven't been great so far this spring. I think he's hovering around 42% from the field and 27% from three-point range. So again, defenses are keying in on these guys now, like Zion Williamson and Romeo Langford, and teams are being built around them. So these are the types of guys who are facing the pressures of having to face constant double teams and proving themselves against teams that are geared to stop them. That's what makes Marvin Bagley that much more impressive, leading the EYBL in points and rebounds. Teams are gearing up to stop these guys. So far, Williamson and Langford haven't adjusted as well. Bagley has thrived.
Yeah, and let's kind of talk about Langford and what I like about him, because I would probably have him at number 2 in this class right now. He's 6'6". He's relatively long. He's a really good athlete, but more than that, he has really, really ridiculously good body control. And it allows him to score from all 3 levels, right? Like, he has a really good floater game. He can finish around the rim really well because he almost like he hangs in the air like a little bit. Like, he's one of those guys. Like, he's not like an elite, like gonna thunderously throw down on you guy. He's like kind of a fluid body control, like hang in the air guy, and finish with finesse is maybe the best word to put it. I like guys that have those well-rounded games early on, as well as he is a really quick athlete more than anything. Like, I don't think he's one of the craziest explosive athletes I've seen, but he's very quick, and that first step kind of allows him to gain a lot of space and score from, like I said, all 3 levels. And I'm a big fan of when I see guys that can do that at 17 years old.
Yeah, definitely. And there's something to be said about Romeo Langford and what he has proven on the high school level already. You talk to some people around Indiana, and he's kind of gained some cult status for some of the games that he had his sophomore season and his junior year. And, he's the type of guy, again, if he gets that consistency, if he figures things out on a game-in, game-out basis where he's getting to the line and scoring regularly, he's going to be tough to stop because he's got those measurables. He's comfortable going left or right. He's comfortable going off of ball screens. And there's a lot of things that he does that are things that you like. He rebounds well from the perimeter. I think that he's shown more as a passer lately than I thought that he had, and he certainly is going to have a chance to be in that conversation for the 2-3 spot. I just think that there's some other guys who are potentially better at the moment.
So I would imagine that one of the guys that you're going to mention is Bol Bol, right?
Yes, he was astounding this weekend.
Yeah, let's talk about Bol Bol because he was kind of the the breakout. I don't want to say breakout because he was already like a 5-star prospect that a lot of people knew about as Manute Bol's son. But it is son, right? Like it's not grandson, right?
Yes, it's his son.
Yeah.
Correct.
A lot of people knew about him, but it felt like this weekend it went to a different level, right? Like everything that you saw about him, and I wasn't there and you were, but like everything that I saw about him said that he has turned into just this hyper elite prospect who can shoot now, who uses incredible length, and who can kind of do everything and anything that he wants on the basketball floor. So what were your impressions of Bol Bol this weekend, given that you were there and kind of saw this thing happen in person?
Yeah, I mean, he's always been a top-notch prospect. When you have those NBA bloodlines, and certainly they're unique NBA bloodlines when you talk about Manute Bol and his lineage and history at the NBA, but I think really with Bol Bol, he's been a known prospect since he was in his late middle school, early high school years, and he just seems a lot happier now that he's made the move to California, and he's got these teammates around him that feed him the ball in optimal situations, and really his perimeter game is what really stands out to me. I mean, he's been astounding in terms of his shooting splits this year on the EYBL. This weekend, he averaged nearly 30 points, 10 rebounds, and 3 blocks a game while shooting 75% from the field, and he was 10 of 14 from three-point range and 86% from the line. So, I mean, this is a guy at 7'2" who is shooting 53% in 8 EYBL games this year, and if you have the type of guy who's that big and that fluid, who can protect the rim and rebound and knock down perimeter shots, again, it goes back to our conversations about new age big guys and what the NBA is looking for now, and he just looked astounding this weekend.
Yeah, one thing that I will say about the jump shot, our good friend Ricky O'Donnell tweeted out a video of his jump shot. I was struck by how low his release point is, and I guess that when you're 7'2", that kind of doesn't matter almost.
Yeah.
Because, no one's really going to necessarily block the shot, or very few people are going to be able to block the shot. But I was struck by how low his release point is.
It is a low release point. You're absolutely right. But I was struck by how often he just netted balls. He rarely hit the rim. I mean, they were clean looks. And as you kind of said, when you're 7'2" and you have a low release and it's somewhat quick, which, he could quicken it up. He could certainly do some things to improve it. But it just looks so good coming out of his hands right now already. And the numbers would seem to indicate that that's correct. I mean, again, 8 games is a small sample size. But again, the way that he's playing, the confidence, scoring from all over the floor. You want him to be a little more active as a rebounder protecting the rim, but he's just good enough, and he's got all of this world of potential in terms of his upside and his wingspan, where he just did some mesmerizing things that you really can't get out of your head after watching him play this weekend.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that you would have both Marvin Bagley and Bol Bol ahead of Zion Williamson and Romeo Langford, who you'd have in the 4-5 range. Who is the guy that I'm missing that you have up there?
I think I would have to have Cameron Reddish. He, was up and down a little bit this weekend, kind of similar to what we talked about with Romeo Langford, where you want to see the more consistency from him. But with his size at 6'7", 6'8", and his ability to play kind of both perimeter spots, handle the ball a bit as a secondary handler, and score, I just am really impressed by his overall growth and development these last couple years. And a wingspan measuring close to 7 feet. He's the type of guy who continues to improve overall ball with his feel for things, and he's played alongside other elite players and helped make them look good, which is something that I like about him. He was a high school teammate of Mohammed Bamba and Brandon Randolph at Westtown this past year, and he made things easier for them in certain points. Playing with a guy in Lewis King right now on team final with the EYBL who's very talented and having a bit of a breakout campaign this spring, and I think Reddish has a lot to do with that, helping make things easier on him. So he's capable of playing with other talented players. We talked about some of these other guys like Williamson and Bagley and Langford having their own teams. Reddish isn't afraid of that at all. He can play with other guys, and just a lot of upside to him. I just hope he's more consistent as time goes on.
Mm-hmm. He's the guy that I feel like is way up there that I haven't seen yet in this class. So I'm really excited to see him when they come out to LA. He's probably the guy I'm going to look most forward to getting a chance to see. This point guard class is relatively interesting to me as well. You have guys like Darius Garland, Emmanuel Quickley, Javonte Smart, Trey Jones. Which one of those guys stands out to you? Which few of them kind of stand out to you?
To me, it's Emmanuel Quickley and Darius Garland, two different types of guards. Quickley is more of the taller, athletic guard who has really improved his jumper this spring. That's really been kind of the thing that has surprised a lot of people. And what I liked about him is where I talked about a lot of these elite-level guys having off nights or having off games and not really bringing it every game. Emmanuel Quickley really had a great opening weekend when I watched him. Played well against Quentin Grimes in a head-to-head matchup, another elite class of 2018 guard that he soundly outplayed and really came to play in high-profile matchups and showed a much improved perimeter jumper. So if he's operating the pick and roll with the type of vision that he has with his ability to get in the paint and he's shooting the ball as well, I think that he's able to really separate himself from his peers because of some of the athletic traits that he has. And with Darius Garland, he's just able to pull up from all over the floor. And with that ability, he keeps defenses honest from the volleyball line and in, and he's a great passer as well. He's really learned to operate pick and rolls quite well. This is his second year on the EYBL after playing with the St. Louis Eagles last year, so he's adjusted to playing at that elite kind of national level, and I'm fascinated to see where he kind of develops over these next few months in terms of his floater game. He is a little bit on the smaller side. He's going to have to prove that he can finish over elite level length and size at the kind of college and NBA level if he wants to be a pro, but I think that ultimately he's got the touch and the savvy where he could be a really quality guard.
Hey, would you say that Emmanuel does things quickly?
He does. It's funny, though. He's actually very measured in his approach in a lot of ways. He can strike at you quickly, but he's the type of guy who, if he does have a trap coming at him, he'll kind of back up a little bit and see over the defense with his size and make quality plays with his vision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just out here making terrible jokes, and you're taking it seriously, man. Come on.
Oh, I know. But with Emmanuel Quickley, it's nothing to be taken lightly. I mean, he's a phenomenal player, and he's played well this spring.
One guy I've gotten to see a decent amount of is Brandon Williams, just being out here in Los Angeles. He's really interesting to me because he's a scoring point guard almost, right? Like he is the 6'1" kid who can, kind of score from all over the court. What do you think of his prospects?
I like him a lot. We watched him a little bit at Pangos last year, Sam, and you kind of described his game perfectly where, he can hit shots from all over the floor. And, again, I think that some of these guards with that pull-up ability, not to compare anybody to Steph Curry, that's otherworldly, but I think that a lot of times we're looking at guys who can pull up from now 27, 28 feet, and we're not sure where to put some of these guys because you don't know what kind of green light they're going to have at the next level or if that's going to be able to sustain or if that's going to be a regular thing or if they're just doing it to jack shots at the high school level. But more and more with some of these guys like Trey Young at the class of 2017 and guys like Garland and Brandon Williams, I think we're going to start to see people embrace some of these guards that can really shoot with ridiculous range on pull-up jumpers. Yeah,
that's a really great point. Let's move on to the last thing I kind of wanted to mention real quick, and we're going to do this very briefly. I wanted to ask you about the growth that you saw from some of these kids that are now one-and-done players, like Josh Jackson, like Markelle Fultz, like De'Aaron Fox, Malik Monk, kids that were in the class of 2016 that are now in the 2017 NBA draft. What players really impressed you in terms of their growth from where they were as a high school recruit to where they are now preparing for the NBA draft?
It's definitely Markelle Fultz for me, because I think the fascinating thing about this class of 2016 high school class, which is now becoming the class of 2017 NBA draft class, is really they're hyper competitive. And this was viewed as one of the deepest classes that college basketball has seen from the freshmen in the last 20 years. They lived up to that hype in a lot of ways with the guys that you just mentioned, Sam. And with Fultz, he was unique because he was kind of the late bloomer among a lot of those guys. He, 2 years ago during this April evaluation period, was being watched by the Blue Bloods kind of for the first time. He had some of the offers from schools like Arizona and Louisville and Washington, but he didn't really have like the marquee names like Duke and Kentucky and North Carolina and some of those schools. So really things hit so quickly for him where he became a guy where it was, maybe he's a 5-star prospect. And then a couple months later you'd watch him and, maybe he's a top 10 player. And, USA Basketball that fall is, well, maybe Markelle Fultz is a top 5 player. Then all of a sudden last year at Nike Hoop Summit, he's in that legitimate conversation for the number 1 pick, and he certainly backed that up with his play this year. So again, with some of these guys like Lonzo Ball, Josh Jackson, Jason Tatum, they were viewed as 5-star prospects as early as freshman, sophomore year of high school, whereas Fultz has really earned that distinction over the last 2 years with the way that he's continually improved and gotten better over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like guys like Jason Tatum and De'Aaron Fox, like they were basically what we expected, I guess, in college, right? Like we figured they would be awesome. There are 2 guys that I think I was more impressed with than I expected to be this season. And the first one is Malik Monk. Malik Monk, we kind of knew had this like volcanic scoring ability, and he could go off at any time for any given moment and go for 50 points, 60 points in AAU games. But like, I was struck by the consistency this year. He was just so alarmingly consistent in terms of the way that, the jump shot always fell for him. It never seemed like there were times where he was out of rhythm as a shooter in college. And, everyone goes through that, especially kids that are 18, 19 years old. But he was a kid that was known particularly for swings in terms of volatile. Sometimes he would just not show up for AAU games, and sometimes he would go for 60. I was struck by how consistently awesome he was this year.
Yeah, that was also surprising to me, Sam, as you kind of mentioned, those scoring performances like we saw the second half against Florida or like we saw against North Carolina has always kind of been the hallmark of Malik Monk's game. And it's interesting. I think back to this conversation I had with a Nike executive when Malik Monk was in high school talking about his game. And I pointed out that exact fact that we're talking about, how he would go for 40 or 50 points in some games and then really disappear for a game or two. And he thought it was a strength factor. And, kind of being a young guy who didn't really have a lot of weight on him yet and wasn't really geared up to handle the physicality of playing back-to-back games and playing at that high of a level. So I'm kind of struck by Malik Monk's consistency in that maybe he's getting stronger and finally getting geared up to have this sort of kind of caliber of game in and game out. Now, he's not going to go for 40 every game, but I think that he is capable of popping off for big runs over a 6 to 8 minute lifespan in a quarter and bring a team back in a game if he starts off slow. And it's going to be fascinating to see him watching at the NBA level. I mean, is he going to be the type of guy who's a microwave guy off the bench right away? Is he a starter? I'm really fascinated to see kind of where he ends up and how he's used.
Yeah. The second guy that I was struck with is actually not in this draft. It's Miles Bridges. I never remembered his game being as well-rounded in terms of passing and in terms of being able to, really create shots off the dribble from the wing and just kind of doing a lot of the stuff that he did for Michigan State this year. I knew that he would take a lot of shots from 3, whether or not he was going to make them, I didn't really know, but he made 38% of them this year, even though the mechanics are still a little bit wonky to me. I knew that he would have all of these crazy alley-oops and dunks and he'd get out in transition. I felt decent about the fact that he would defend under Tom Izzo at Michigan State. I didn't expect the well-rounded nature of everything else and the glue that holds all of those pieces together in his game.
Yeah, I was really impressed by Miles Bridges, his final spring on the AAU circuit. And it was an instance where he was playing on a really talented AAU team with Cassius Winston, his future teammate at Michigan State. And Cassius Winston went down with an injury midway through the spring. And Bridges, after that, basically had to will that team to the Peach Jam on basically doing everything from scoring to rebounding to distributing more. And I think that's when he really showed that he was more than a 5-star athlete and that he actually was a 5-star basketball player. And, that skill level maybe caught some people by surprise, but it's always been there in small flashes. But the three-point consistency surprised me the most. He was making some really difficult shots this year from the perimeter that we just weren't accustomed to seeing with Miles Bridges. You knew that athleticism was there around the rim, the raw power, his ability to do things with that athleticism defensively. But, if he's able to hit perimeter shots and make tough looks like that, that certainly opens up a lot of different things for him offensively.
The last guy I kind of want to point out here is Zach Collins, too. He was a real late riser throughout his recruiting process because, in high school, he was stuck behind Chase Jeter and Steven Zimmerman at Bishop Gorman. He, I believe, hurt himself in his senior year. Is that right? He, broke his shoulder? Does that sound right? A
little bit, yeah. He had a bit of an injury, yeah.
So, the growth that he showed this year going from, being a McDonald's All-American, he was probably the lowest rated McDonald's All-American last year, to being what is now considered maybe the best big man prospect in this draft outside of Lauri Markkanen. It's really impressive growth to me. And, he's still going to have to mature physically. He's still going to have to, improve and get his game a little bit more well-rounded in terms of just the little nuances of basketball. But the skill set is so high that I was really struck by just the amount that he continues to improve basically every single year.
Yeah, and he's always got that chip on his shoulder, as you said, Sam. How many guys that you can remember are potential lottery picks and guys who were McDonald's All-Americans that didn't start for their high school team junior year? And, that's what happens
he started now 1 year out of his 5 high school and college years. Yeah,
which is just bananas if you think about it. But playing behind guys like Chase Jeter and Steven Zimmerman, who were McDonald's All-Americans, he took his lumps in practice every single day facing legitimate 7-footers, and that's invaluable at the high school level. A lot of guys at the high school level don't have other big guys that are any good to go against, let alone other McDonald's All-Americans. And he came out a little bit underrated on the circuit. He's always kind of had that chip on his shoulder. And with Gonzaga, again, you talked with him at the Final Four, and he said, with Karnowski coming back, that obviously wasn't a foregone conclusion. He could have very well been a starter for Gonzaga this year, but once again, he embraced his role coming off the bench. He showed that he could be a spark there, and I think he showed a lot more skill as a post scorer and as a guy who could protect the rim and rebound than people anticipated.
Yeah, that's a great point to kind of close on here. Scott, do you have anything else you want to talk about before we get out of here?
We could talk all night, but I think we've hit it all in the head in terms of recruiting stuff and the draft and everything. But it should be a fun summer and spring. The class of 2018, as I've kind of alluded to, much weaker than some of these classes we've seen in the past 2 years with the class of 2016 and class of 2017. But the class of 2019, the rising high school juniors, that'll be one to keep more of an eye on in terms of NBA draft guys and potential one-and-done guys. So if you're into recruiting, it should be a fun couple months, and certainly some events to watch for in these next few months here.
Yeah, and I'm sure that, once I get to see these kids out in Los Angeles, I'll have you on probably at the end of next month, beginning of June, and we'll talk about all this. 2019 kids, RJ Barrett and Charles Bassey, I believe, are the two that we need to know, correct?
Yeah, there's going to be a bunch. As kind of similar to the class of 2016, there appears to be a healthy amount of depth, but, the star power for right now, RJ Barrett and Charles Bassey are the two names to watch.
Yep. All right, Scott, tell the people where they can find your work.
You can find my work on NBC Sports and Bleacher Report, as well as CSN Chicago locally for Chicago high school basketball, and follow me on Twitter at PhillipsHoops.
Well, Scott, thanks a lot. This has been the Game Theory Podcast. You can subscribe to us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, Android, Stitcher, whatever podcasting app that you use. I am certain that we're up on that service. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the show on iTunes. It really helps us boost us in the ratings and gets us a little bit more viewership or listenership. Man, am I using bad English right now, but we'll just roll with it. And again, we'll be back Wednesday to talk about either some NBA playoffs or NBA draft. I have not decided yet how I want to attack this, Rockets beatdown that just happened in San Antonio. So until next time, we'll talk soon.